Months passed, and Sarah could hardly believe how much had changed. It felt as though a lifetime had passed since she had first brought the three sisters into her home, desperate to give them a better life. What had started as an act of compassion had turned into something much more. The sisters were no longer just survivors of a harsh world. They were becoming part of her family, slowly but surely. Lena, Anna, and Sophia had each grown in their own way, and Sarah had watched their transformation with a mixture of pride and wonder. Their past still haunted them, but it was no longer the first thing they thought about every day. Slowly, the shadows that had followed them began to fade, replaced by the warmth of a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of something better. Lena, once so guarded and cold, had started to open up. She was still quiet, but there was a softness in her now, a kindness that Sarah had never seen in her when she first arrived. Lena had found a love for gardening, and often she and Sarah would spend hours together in the garden planting flowers and vegetables. It was during those times that Lena would talk, small things at first, but then bigger things as she grew more comfortable. She told Sarah about the dreams she had, about the things she wanted to do when she was older, about how she wanted to help other children who had been through what she and her sisters had faced. Anna had always been the quieter of the two, but now she had moments of deep thought, moments when she would share things she had never spoken of before. She had started to learn how to read and write, something she had never had the chance to do before coming to Sarah's house. At first it was difficult, but Anna's determination was incredible. Sarah was amazed at how quickly she picked it up, and it became a special thing they did together. Every evening after dinner, Anna would sit with Sarah, working on her lessons, and they would talk about the world, about the future, and the things Anna hoped for. Sophia, the youngest, had blossomed the most. It had taken a while for her to trust, but once she did, her personality began to shine through. She was curious, creative, and full of energy. Sophia loved drawing pictures, and every wall in Sarah's house was decorated with her colorful artwork. She would often sit with Sarah and Emma, her face full of excitement as she showed them the world she had created with her crayons. Sophia had also begun asking questions about her own mother, but Sarah had always been careful with how she answered. She never wanted to give Sophia false hope, but she also didn't want to take away her memories. In the beginning, the thought of the future had seemed impossible. There were so many questions, so many uncertainties, but now the future seemed bright. The girls were thriving. They were starting to dream again, and so was Sarah. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Sarah looked around at the family she had built. The house was cozy, filled with the sounds of life. Her children, Emma, James, and Lily, were laughing and playing with the three sisters. They had all grown so much. The once quiet, distant girls had become part of their family in every sense of the word. They were no longer strangers. They were sisters, and they were all bound together by love. Sarah realized that she had something she had never expected, a second chance at family. When she had first lost Mark, she thought she would never find happiness again. But now, surrounded by these girls, by her children, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Sophia ran up to Sarah, holding a drawing she had just finished. "Look, Mama," she said, her face glowing with pride. "I made a picture of us. We're all together like a big family." Sarah smiled, taking the drawing from Sophia's hands. It was a picture of the family with everyone holding hands. It was simple, but it meant the world to Sarah. She looked at the picture and then at the smiling faces of the girls, her heart swelling with love. They were hers now, all of them. "I love it, Sophia," Sarah said, kissing the top of her head. "You're a wonderful artist." Lena, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, looked up from her book. "I want to help people one day," she said, her voice steady. "I want to make sure no one goes through what we went through. I want to make sure no one feels alone." Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at Lena, proud of how far she had come. "You'll do great things, Lena," she said. I have no doubt about that. The girls had all found something they loved, something they could hold on to. They had found purpose, a sense of belonging, and most importantly, hope. And it wasn't just the girls who were changing. Sarah herself was changing. She had found a strength in herself that she hadn't known existed. She had found a purpose in her life that went beyond just surviving. She was helping to rebuild a family, and in the process she had built something she hadn't expected: a future. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living, It was about dreams, love, and family. One afternoon, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It was from the local school inviting the girls to attend. The school had heard about Sarah's efforts to care for the girls, and they wanted to offer them the chance to learn. Sarah smiled as she read the letter aloud to the girls who were sitting at the kitchen table. "That's amazing," Emma said, her eyes wide with excitement. "You're all going to school," Sarah said, her voice full of joy. "This is your chance to learn, to grow, and to make your dreams come true." Lena's eyes filled with tears and she turned away quickly, trying to hide them. "I never thought this day would come," she whispered. "You earned this," Sarah said, putting a hand on Lena's shoulder. "You've worked so hard and now you get to learn everything you've always wanted to know. This is just the beginning." The girls were excited, but they were also nervous. School was a new experience and they had never had the chance to go before. But Sarah was there, supporting them every step of the way. She knew that it would be difficult at first, but she also knew that they could do it. The first day of school came, and Sarah watched as the girls stepped onto the bus, dressed in new clothes, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. They were nervous but excited. Sarah stood on the porch, her heart full of pride. They had come so far, from the broken and scared girls she had first brought into her home, to these strong, confident young women ready to take on the world. As the bus drove away, Sarah stood there for a moment watching them go. She knew that this was just another step in their journey, and there would be many more challenges to face. But she also knew one thing for certain: they had each other, and together they could face anything. Sarah turned and walked back into the house, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She had given the girls a chance at a new life, but in doing so she had also given herself a chance at happiness. The family she had built one step at a time was stronger than anything she could have imagined. They had found each other, and that was all that mattered. As Sarah sat down in the living room, she smiled to herself. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Together they had built a new life, a life full of love, hope, and the promise of a bright future. And Sarah knew that no matter what happened, they would always be a family. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, Sarah's home began to feel more like a true family. The days were filled with small victories, quiet moments of understanding, and the kind of happiness that only grew stronger when shared. But there were still moments of struggle. Trust wasn't something that could be rushed. It had to be built one step at a time. Sarah knew that, and she was prepared to wait as long as it took. After all, these girls had been through far too much to expect them to heal overnight. At first, the three sisters kept to themselves, spending most of their time with each other. They would play together in the garden or sit quietly in their room, whispering to each other in a language Sarah couldn't quite understand. But despite their quietness, Sarah saw the change that was beginning to happen. They weren't as withdrawn as they had been before. They were beginning to trust her, slowly but surely. Lena, the oldest, had started to help Sarah with small tasks around the house. She would chop vegetables for dinner or dust the shelves in the living room. At first, Sarah had to encourage her, but eventually, Lena did it on her own without needing to be asked. Sarah watched the girl closely, noticing how she began to look less burdened, less guarded. The pain was still there, hidden behind her eyes, but it wasn't as sharp as it once had been. Anna, the middle sister, was quieter, but Sarah noticed she had a gentle soul. She would often sit beside Sarah when she was sewing or mending clothes, offering soft comments or questions about how things were done. Anna didn't say much, but she was always there, her presence a silent reminder that they were starting to become part of the same world. Sophia, the youngest, was the wildest of them all. She still had trouble sitting still and often ran around the yard, chasing after the chickens or playing games with Sarah's children. But there were moments when Sophia would come to Sarah, sit beside her, and quietly ask questions about her life, about what it had been like when Sarah was a little girl. One evening, after dinner, as they all gathered in the living room, Sarah felt a warm sense of contentment settle over her. It was a simple evening, nothing extraordinary, just her and the girls sitting together talking and laughing. But for the first time, Sarah realized that they were starting to feel like a family. Sophia was sitting on the floor, playing with a ball, while Lena and Anna worked together to fold the laundry. Emma, Sarah's daughter, sat by the window reading a book, and James and Lily were playing a game on the floor. It was chaotic, but in the best way possible. Sarah watched her children and the three girls interact, a smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't perfect. There were still times when the girls would retreat into their own world, when their old wounds would come to the surface. But there were more moments of laughter now, more moments of connection. One day, Lena surprised Sarah by asking if she could help with dinner. "I know how to make soup," she said shyly, her eyes avoiding Sarah's. "I used to help my mom." Sarah's heart ached at the mention of Lena's mother, but she smiled warmly. "I would love that," she said. "Let's make the soup together." Lena's face lit up, and for the first time, Sarah saw a spark of joy in her eyes. They worked side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot. Lena's hands were steady, and she moved with a grace that Sarah hadn't expected. As they cooked, they talked. About the soup, about the weather, and about things that didn't matter at all. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a moment of peace. After the soup was done, they sat down together at the table to eat. Lena, Anna, and Sophia were more relaxed than they had been in the past. It wasn't perfect, but Sarah could see that they were starting to feel more comfortable in her home, in their new life. The next day, something unexpected happened. Sarah was working in the garden when she heard a soft knock at the door. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked into the house, curious about who could be visiting. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see the neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, standing there with a basket of bread. "Hello, Sarah," Mrs. Thompson said with a warm smile. "I thought I'd bring over some fresh bread for you and the girls." Sarah stepped aside to let Mrs. Thompson in, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you so much," she said, taking the basket. "That's very sweet of you." Mrs. Thompson glanced at the three sisters who were sitting at the table talking quietly. "They're all so quiet," she said softly. "I know they've been through a lot, but have they started adjusting? I've noticed them around town and they seem different." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "They're starting to settle in," she said. "It's been a slow process, but I think they're finally starting to feel safe." Mrs. Thompson smiled, her eyes glinting with understanding. "That's good to hear. It's not easy, taking in children who've been through so much, but I can see that they're beginning to open up." "You're doing a wonderful job, Sarah." "Thank you," Sarah replied, touched by her words. "It's not easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Mrs. Thompson left a little while later, but her visit left Sarah feeling uplifted. It was a small gesture, but it meant so much. It reminded Sarah that she wasn't alone in this journey. People in the community were beginning to see the progress the girls were making, and it gave her hope that the future would be brighter for them. As the weeks continued to pass, Sarah saw more changes in the girls. They began to speak more freely, to share little bits of their lives with Sarah. Lena started talking about her past, about the time she and her sisters had spent in the orphanage before being placed with the man who had sold them. It wasn't easy for her to speak of it, and Sarah listened with a heavy heart. But she was grateful that Lena was finally able to talk about it. Anna shared stories of the time when they had lived with their mother, of the moments when life had been easier, before everything fell apart. Sophia, the youngest, began to ask Sarah about her own childhood, about the things she had done when she was a little girl. Sarah would tell her stories about the games she used to play, the places she had gone, and the things that had made her laugh. Slowly, Sophia's sadness began to fade, replaced by the innocent curiosity that every child should have. One afternoon, after they had all finished cleaning the house, Sarah sat the girls down in the living room. "I want you all to know something," she said, looking at each of them. "I know it hasn't been easy for any of us, but we're in this together. We're a family now, and that means we're here for each other no matter what. If there's anything you ever need to talk about, I'm here." Lena, Anna, and Sophia all looked at Sarah with wide eyes, as though they had never heard words like that before. Slowly, Lena nodded, her expression softer than it had ever been. Anna smiled faintly, and Sophia reached out to grab Sarah's hand, a simple gesture that made Sarah's heart swell with emotion. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, moments of doubt, and times when the scars of the past would show up unexpectedly. But Sarah knew one thing for sure: they were making progress. They were becoming a family, and that was all that mattered. The next few days passed slowly, filled with a quiet tension. Sarah was trying her best to make the girls feel at home, but it wasn't easy. Each day, the three sisters grew a little more comfortable, but they remained distant, their eyes filled with a kind of sadness that Sarah couldn't ignore. They didn't talk much, and when they did, Their voices were soft, as though they didn't want anyone to hear the pain in their words. Sarah could see the layers of fear and uncertainty in their faces, and her heart ached for them. She knew it would take time, but she was determined to help them heal. Lena, the oldest, seemed to be the most guarded. She was quiet and cautious, always watching Sarah with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken questions. Anna, the middle sister, was a little more open but still very shy. She would sometimes offer a small smile, but it never reached her eyes. Sophia, the youngest, was different. She would play with Sarah's children, trying her best to fit in, but even she couldn't hide the sadness that lingered in her eyes. One morning, as Sarah was making breakfast, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Lena standing in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. The girl was staring at the ground, not meeting Sarah's gaze. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked gently, setting down the spoon she was holding. She could sense that something had changed in Lena today. The air felt heavier, as if Lena was finally ready to talk or at least ask something. Lena hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I don't understand," she said in a soft voice. "Why are you doing all this for us? You barely know us, and yet you've given us everything. Why would you do that?" The question hung in the air, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this moment, but hearing it out loud made her realize how deeply these girls had been hurt by the world. They didn't know what it meant to be cared for without strings attached, to be loved for simply being who they were. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to choose her words carefully. "I do it because I know what it feels like to lose someone you love," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "When my husband passed away, I felt like my world had fallen apart. I couldn't do it alone, but I found strength in my children. And now I want to give that same strength to you. You don't have to be alone anymore. You don't have to be afraid anymore. We're family now." Lena looked at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Sarah could tell she was processing the words, weighing them against the painful memories that must have been running through her mind. Finally, Lena spoke again, her voice a little steadier. "You really mean it?" she asked quietly. "That we're family?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her heart swelling with a mix of sadness and hope. "We're family, and families take care of each other." Lena stood there for a while longer, as if trying to figure out if Sarah was telling the truth. Sarah didn't rush her. She understood that trust had to be earned, and she wasn't going to push. After a long pause, Lena nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try." The next few days were full of small steps. The girls began to trust Sarah a little more, though their wounds ran deep. At times, Sarah would catch them staring out of the window, lost in thought or talking in hushed voices to each other. They were still haunted by their past, but Sarah could see glimmers of hope beginning to form in their eyes. Anna, the middle sister, was the next to open up. She had a quiet strength about her, one that Sarah admired. She wasn't as closed off as Lena, but she wasn't exactly eager to share her story either. Still, she seemed to appreciate the little things Sarah did for her. Anna began to help Sarah in the garden, picking vegetables and flowers, and sometimes she would linger in the kitchen, offering to chop vegetables or set the table. These small acts of kindness were the first signs that Anna was beginning to trust her. One evening, after a long day of working around the house, Anna approached Sarah as she was washing dishes. The air between them had shifted, and Sarah could tell that Anna was ready to say something. "Sarah," Anna said quietly, her voice almost shy. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Sarah replied, drying her hands and turning to face the girl. Anna bit her lip, looking down at her feet before meeting Sarah's eyes. What if we're not able to be a family? What if we can't fit in? What if we just can't change?" The question caught Sarah off guard. It wasn't an easy thing to answer, but she understood the fear behind it. The fear of never being able to truly belong, of always feeling like an outsider, no matter how hard you tried. "Sometimes it takes time," Sarah said gently, stepping closer to Anna. "We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try. And even if it's hard, I promise I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." Anna looked up at her, a flicker of hope shining through the sadness in her eyes. "You mean it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Sarah replied. "You're not alone anymore, Anna. You're part of this family. And no matter what happens, we'll figure it out together." Anna nodded slowly, a small, tentative smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It wasn't much, but to Sarah it was everything. It was a sign that the walls the girls had built around themselves were starting to crumble, little by little. Sophia, the youngest, was the hardest to reach. She had the most trouble adjusting, not understanding why everything felt different now. Sarah found Sophia sitting alone in the corner one afternoon, clutching a small stuffed bear to her chest. She was staring out the window, her eyes distant. "Hey there," Sarah said softly, kneeling down beside her. "What's on your mind?" Sophia didn't answer right away. She just hugged the bear tighter and stared out at the garden. Then with a sigh she spoke. "I miss my mom," Sophia said quietly, her voice full of sadness. "I want her to come back." Sarah's heart broke at the words. She reached out gently and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I know you miss her," she said softly. "But I'm here now and I'll take care of you. You're safe here. You don't have to be scared anymore." Sophia didn't say anything else, but after a few moments she leaned into Sarah's side. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sarah knew there was a long road ahead. The girls had been through so much and their scars would not heal overnight. But as each day passed, Sarah saw the smallest signs of progress. Lena was starting to smile more. Anna was opening up, and even Sophia was beginning to trust her piece by piece. It wasn't going to be easy, but Sarah had never been one to give up. She had promised the girls that they were safe now, and she intended to keep that promise. Slowly but surely, they were starting to build something new, something that could grow into a real family. And though Sarah had no idea what the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to let go. She wasn't going to let these girls fall through the cracks, not on her watchy. Sarah's heart raced as she led the three sisters through the dark, narrow streets. The place where she had found them was nothing like the peaceful, quiet town where Sarah and her children had once lived. The air was thick with dust and the smell of something rotten. The buildings around her were old and crumbling like forgotten ruins. Every step felt heavier, as if she were carrying not only her own weight but the weight of what she had just done. She had bought them. The girls. She had bought them with the last of her money, her precious necklace. It was a decision she had made on instinct, driven by a desire to save them from a life of unimaginable cruelty. But now that she had them, now that she was walking through these streets with three young girls in tow, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice. She didn't know what she was walking into, what challenges lay ahead. The man who had sold the girls to her had been cold and indifferent, hardly a care in the world for what had happened to them. Sarah still remembered his face, the way he looked at her as if he were offering a product instead of human lives. But the girls were more than that. They weren't just things to be bought and sold. They were children, filled with potential and pain, lost in a world that had failed them. She couldn't allow them to remain in that dark world, no matter the cost. As Sarah walked through the streets, the girls stayed close to her side, their heads still covered by the sacks. They didn't speak, didn't even look up. It was as if they were afraid to hope, afraid to trust. Sarah understood. They had been through so much already. Who could blame them for not trusting a stranger, even one who had just bought their freedom? With every step, Sarah's heart ached for them. She wanted to pull the sacks off their heads, to see their faces, to let them know they were safe now. But she knew it wasn't that simple. The fear in their eyes was clear, and it was going to take more than just kindness to undo the pain they had experienced. Trust, she knew, was something that had to be earned. The walk back to her home was long. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, as if everyone had disappeared into the shadows. The town seemed different, as though the darkness had seeped into every corner. It wasn't the place she had once known. Finally, after what felt like hours, Sarah and the girls reached her small home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a modest house with a small garden and a front porch. But to Sarah, it was everything. It was a safe place, a place where her children could be children again. And now it would be a home for these three girls as well. As they stepped through the door, Sarah's children rushed to greet her. Emma, James, and Lily stood by the door, their faces lighting up when they saw their mother. But when they saw the three strange girls standing behind Sarah, their expressions changed to one of confusion. Emma, the oldest, stepped forward cautiously. She was a smart girl, and Sarah knew she would have questions. But Sarah didn't have the answers yet. "Mom, who are they?" Emma asked, her voice quiet but full of curiosity. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting between the three sisters. They were standing so still, their bodies tense with fear. "These are the girls I told you about," Sarah said softly. "Their names are Lena, Anna, and Sophia. They've been through a lot, but we're going to help them. They're going to be part of our family now." Emma didn't say anything at first. She simply nodded, her eyes scanning the three sisters. Then, without another word, she took Lily's hand and led her toward the living room. James stayed behind, watching the strangers with wide eyes. Sarah guided the three sisters into the small kitchen, where she had already prepared a meal for them. It wasn't much, a simple soup and some bread, but it was the best she could offer. She sat them down at the table, urging them to eat, though they didn't move. They were still too scared to take a bite. Lena, the oldest of the three, was the first to speak. Her voice was low, shaky, and full of uncertainty. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her eyes downcast. "What do you want from us?" Sarah's heart broke at the question. She had expected it. She had known the girls wouldn't trust her right away. "I don't want anything from you," Sarah said softly. "I just want to help. You don't have to be afraid anymore. You're safe here." But Lena didn't seem convinced. She looked at Sarah with a mixture of fear and doubt. "We've been safe before," she said bitterly. But it didn't last. The words stung. Sarah could see the weight of their past in Lena's eyes. She didn't know the full story, but she could feel the pain that had shaped these girls into who they were. They had been betrayed, abandoned, and used. And now, even in a safe home, they couldn't believe it was real. "That's not going to happen here," Sarah promised. "You're going to be part of our family now. No one is going to hurt you again." For a long moment, there was silence. The three girls exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then slowly they began to eat one bite at a time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sarah knew it was going to take time to gain their trust. She couldn't rush them. Healing would take patience, and she was willing to give it. As the evening wore on, Sarah set up the spare room for the girls. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and safe. She gave them fresh sheets and blankets, something they hadn't had in a long time. The sisters hesitated at first, standing at the doorway of the room, but Sarah gently encouraged them to rest. She knew they had been through too much to expect them to open up all at once. When Sarah returned to the living room, her own children were sitting together on the couch, watching her closely. Emma was the first to speak. "Do you think they'll be okay, Mom?" she asked quietly. Sarah sat down beside her children, taking a deep breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know that we're going to do everything we can to help them heal. And we're going to do it together as a family." Emma nodded, her face serious. "We'll help them, right, Mom?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice full of determination. "We're all in this together." That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. The girls were here now, in her home, under her care. She had promised to protect them, to be their family. But Sarah knew that she had a long road ahead of her. The girls were broken, lost, and distrustful. But Sarah wasn't going to give up on them. They would heal together, and maybe, just maybe, they would find a new kind of happiness. Tomorrow would be a new day, and Sarah was ready for whatever it might bring. Sarah's life had not always been this hard. In the past, she had a loving husband, a small house filled with the sound of laughter, and 3 beautiful children. They weren't rich, but they had enough. Sarah and her husband, Mark, worked together to make their little home a happy place. They were a family who had dreams of a bright future. But all of that changed in an instant. One cold autumn morning, Sarah's world turned upside down. Mark, her husband, fell ill. It started with a simple cough, but it grew worse, and within weeks he was bedridden. Sarah did everything she could, rushing to doctors, trying medicine, but nothing seemed to work. One night, after Sarah had spent hours by his side, Mark passed away quietly in his sleep. Just like that, Sarah was alone. She had always relied on Mark's strength. He had been the provider, the protector, and the source of hope.
Now, with him gone, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness.
She didn't know what to do. There was no time to grieve. Her children, all under the age of 10, needed her now more than ever. Emma, the oldest at 10, was quiet and wise beyond her years. James, 7, was a curious boy full of energy, while little Lily, at 4, was a joyful ball of energy who always had a smile on her face, even in the worst of times. With Mark's death, Sarah lost not just her husband but her security. She was left with a small savings account that was quickly draining away and no job. Mark had been the one working while she took care of the house and children. Now, she faced the harsh reality of providing for her family alone. As the weeks went by, Sarah struggled to pay bills and buy food. The town they lived in wasn't rich, and jobs were hard to find. Sarah tried to stretch the little money she had, finding odd jobs, cleaning houses, and doing anything she could. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make enough. Her children were growing hungry. The weight of it all felt unbearable. One morning, as Sarah walked into the town square to buy some bread, she overheard a conversation that would change her life. A group of women were gossiping near the market stalls, talking about a terrible rumor that Sarah couldn't ignore. They spoke of 3 young sisters who had been living in a cruel, cold household. Their parents had died, and the girls were now being sold off to the highest bidder. Sarah's heart sank. She couldn't imagine what those poor girls must be going through. Her own children were suffering, but at least they had her. The thought of children being treated as property, bought and sold, was something she could hardly bear. But Sarah knew that she couldn't just walk away. She had to do something. She didn't know what was driving her, but in that moment something inside Sarah clicked. She needed to help them. She had nothing to offer, but the thought of 3 little girls with no one to care for them was something Sarah couldn't ignore. She thought of her own children and how much they meant to her. She wanted to be the one who could change their lives, even if only for a moment. As Sarah walked through the streets, her mind raced with thoughts of what she could do. She didn't have much, but she knew she had a heart big enough to love those girls as her own. She needed to find them and bring them to safety. But where would she find them? Who was selling them? Sarah had to know more. Days passed, and Sarah couldn't shake the thought of the 3 sisters. She visited the market daily, hoping for more information. Then one evening, as the sun began to set, she heard whispers of the place where the girls were being kept. It was a rundown area on the outskirts of the town, where rumors said that children were traded like livestock. It was a dangerous place, full of shady figures who had no care for the lives of those they exploited. But Sarah couldn't let fear stop her. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The thought of those girls haunted her every night. She thought of how her own children would have felt if they had been in their shoes. They would have been scared, alone, with no one to protect them. Sarah knew that she had to take a step forward, no matter how uncertain or frightening it seemed. The next morning, Sarah gathered all the courage she could muster. She sold the last of her jewelry, a necklace Mark had given her for their wedding anniversary, to gather the money she needed. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She had to make it work. The journey was long, and the path was unfamiliar, but Sarah pressed on, determined to do whatever it took to save those girls. When she reached the dark, dusty area where the girls were being held, Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The buildings were old and crumbling, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and decay. The people here seemed like shadows, moving quickly and quietly, as if they didn't want to be noticed. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she walked deeper into the area. It wasn't long before Sarah found the man who was in charge of the girls. He was tall and thin, his face hardened by years of cruelty. He looked at Sarah with cold eyes as she approached, asking if she was interested in purchasing the children. Despite the fear racing through her, Sarah spoke with determination. She didn't have much, but she was willing to trade everything she could to save those girls. The man smirked at her, his eyes calculating the worth of what she was offering. After a tense negotiation, he agreed to let the girls go, accepting what Sarah had. When Sarah saw the girls for the first time, her heart broke. Their heads were covered with sacks, and they were trembling with fear. They didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence, but Sarah could feel their pain. These girls had been through more than anyone should endure, and yet they were still alive, still holding on. The moment Sarah took the girls by the hand, she knew there was no turning back. This was no longer just about saving them. It was about building a new life for all of them. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't leave them behind. As Sarah walked away from the market, the weight of what she had just done settled into her chest. She had bought the girls, yes, but it was more than that. She had bought them a chance at life, at hope, at something better than what they had been given. In that moment, Sarah realized that she wasn't just saving the girls. She was saving herself too.